Why are we here today, John?
Supporting Andy Slater and Joe's event. Try to keep the momentum going. I got a phone call from somebody in a local authority brigade saying, we feel like this service has ticked the box. The management, the upper management feel they've ticked the box and we ain't got to where we need to be, and it's a concern being flagged from the floor. So, 1, momentum. 2, break the silos. There is no, it's no good NFCC. 4, Chemical Industries Association working in silos to deal with this as an issue. We need to say, well, what are you doing? What's your best practice? Can we learn something from those other people rather than, for example, with a fire service, therefore we must be doing it right?
Yeah, there is a strange egotism. I always say pride is one of our greatest strengths, but it's also one of our biggest failings. And there's an element of, the way it's always done, you spoke about before. You mentioned something in there, which I found, there's several things I took note of. There's 2 ends of this spectrum. You spoke about, 1, it's too late for me. And then you spoke about an apathy of the next generation. How do we bridge that gap? And how do you address each end of that spectrum? Because you did so beautifully in there, and I know I'm asking you to revisit, but there's still work to be done at both ends of that spectrum, certainly more so for those coming into our organisations, but to those that think they've missed their window to help themselves.
So I think from the new recruits, they're getting the process right from the off in terms of understanding the decon process, but I don't think they're understanding what's behind that. So
I was going to say, take me through those layers, because what are the common misunderstandings when people talk about prevention or decontamination or carcinogens? What do people commonly misunderstand about that and the depth to which, because you almost speak about it in a layered process of ways that this can affect us?
Well, if we start with the youngsters, yourself casting our minds back to when we were new. You don't want to speak out of turn. You go onto stations and you meet a generational firefighter who perhaps has got that, it's too late for me. And so he kind of showcases behaviours that we don't really want him to showcase. And so we set a conflict off quite early in that new firefighter who's just learned all these processes and then bumps into this old hand who thinks it's too late for me. And he goes, what are you doing that for? Yeah, well, we've done this on this, and it's the way we do it. You don't need to do it that way. Look, just do this, and that's enough, really. I think for all levels, all responders, not just firefighters, we need to teach them the underlying element of why, for example, to youngsters from 18 to, let's say, 45, you're teaching them to get clean. Teach them about, testicular cancer, bladder cancer, cracking one for you, Pete, with your background in training. We teach firefighters to hydrate. The bit we're missing in that message, why are we telling them to hydrate? Because we want them to put back in the body the liquids that, they've sweated out.
Liquids, electrolytes, all sorts.
Electrolytes and imbalance. What we're missing is, when we absorb toxins in the body, they're stored in the kidneys and the bladder. If we're dehydrated, those nasty toxins, where are they going to sit? They're going to sit on the walls of those organs, the bladder especially. Now, 2007, there was a government study done that proved the link to bladder cancer in 2007. So we've known about it for 18 years. Hydration should be, yes, you're putting it back in your body, but more, you're forcing your body and your kidneys to flush anything that's got in there, rather than you're dehydrated and it's sitting on the walls of the bladder. Teach everybody that, so because I'm poor at drinking enough. I get told off all the time for it, but I'm not wearing BA. You know, I'm not going into attack units. You know, so
I'm never without a bottle.
no.
But then again, I end up weeing all the time. I wonder if there's something wrong with me. But
Well,
anyway.
that kind of was the transition then. So we get over. So if we just go back to the testicular cancer bit, we're saying, well, there's a significant risk of that because there is a decent frequency of it in firefighters under those ages and 35 especially. So, right, what are we going to do? Well, first of all, then let's get people on station who can run a session on a watch, and using the tools I'm talking about, medical toys that are designed for this. Let's teach everybody what testicular cancer, palpable, non-palpable lumps actually feel like. And let's show them what other things they could develop that might cause them concern. Strains, groin strains, varicelles, swollen veins in there, little almost like benign cysts. And then let's bring the wise partners in and teach them what it feels like. So that I go home off a day shift and I found a lump. Am I imagining it? Is it really there? Well, I go home to my other half and say, I've got a lump. I'm a bit concerned about it. But she's had the same kind of understanding of the issue. She can say, yeah, we're not saying don't go to doctors. What we are saying is, actually, that doesn't feel like the right kind of lump. Yes, there's a lump and we're going to get it checked. So flip that round. Breast cancer, the same. So these medical toys, they're made of silicone, and they put in palpable, non-palpable lumps, so cancerous, non-cancerous. And for one of them, you've got to really feel at it properly. So why don't we teach firefighters, males and female firefighters, both, and the families, so that the first stop in the comfort chain is in the house. And you're not having to hide behind keeping this to yourself. Now, I'll give you an example. After my first thumb tumour removal, March, it grew back. By September, it had come back bigger than the first one. So I went to the plastics consultant, and he said, right, we're going to fuse the bone in your thumb. Cut it out, fuse the bone in your thumb. Right, fine, that's the plan. I'm happy. I drive home. He rang me up 2 hours later. He said, could you come back in tomorrow? I just need to chat about what we were on about. Now, he's in Preston, that's 45 minutes. So I drive over, I get there, I'm on my own. He said, we've had a look at the tumour we took out in March, and our pathologist has said it was misdiagnosed, and that she believes that what you've got is a particular kind of sarcoma. So I said, right. I said, so what's that mean? He says, well, we've sent it off to Liverpool to a professor for him to give us a second opinion. So in terms of the plan, everything's on hold until he comes back to us. Okay, what's that mean? He says, right, well, if it is what we think it is, sorry to say, but you've probably maybe got 6 months. And that's it. So I drove home in tears, in a bad state mentally. And I thought, I can't say anything to Pam, Becky. I can't say anything to anybody. So for 3 weeks, I was living, going to sleep every night, not sleeping, with this thought of 6 months. And I'm forecasting forward, where does that take me to? And then from that point, what am I going to miss? 3 weeks later, 20 nights it was, he rung me up. Sorry, John, we got it wrong. It's this kind of a tumour, and so we're going to operate. So 3 weeks after that.
You've spent a lot of time with people dealing with those moments. I think there's an element of connection and rapport because you've got, as you just shared there, your own. What have you learned about holding space for people as they come to learn of a diagnosis? For people that are concerned, for people that have gone for a test and are waiting results, for people that are supporting them. We're here today with Martin's family. What have you learned about supporting people and holding space for them?
Be candid. Be very open. Don't flower it. Don't make it into something it isn't. Just give them the facts. Somebody asked me, what are the next steps? I've been diagnosed with this, or I'm going for this. Be open. Tell them what's coming. Tell them what each step means. There's massive myths, Pete.
Okay.
People will denigrate the PSA test. The PSA test is only one step in a process. It's saying you might have an issue. Beyond a certain point, provided, so for example, I always teach on the talks that I do, if you've ridden a bike, you've had kind of sexual relations with anybody or whatever, they can all elevate your PSA level. So you have a PSA test today and it's above the guidelines. Your doctor would probably say, refrain from X, Y, and Z for the next 2 weeks, then we'll do a repeat. Now, if you've got, for example, I started off with an enlarged prostate, my baseline level's a little bit higher. So beyond that, they'll start to do something. So tell people that. Then when they're coming back, you're being open and you're saying, right, now I know saying to you, you've been diagnosed with this, don't worry about it. I might as well just not have said those words, because naturally we've been programmed to believe that cancer kills.
Yeah.
And it does when it's not found. And it's the counter argument, what I said in there too. If we're going to spend money as a service, spend it at the right end. You know, if we catch, you get diagnosed with stage 1, it's not gone outside the prostate capsule, so by robotic surgery, it can be removed, you'd be monitored, you'll be back at work in maybe 6 weeks. So we don't have to replace you, we don't have to train somebody new, we don't lose your experience and your knowledge.
And you were saying there's 96% will return back from a stage 1, from that early screening, early intervention.
Yeah, it's around that, yeah. Depends which statistics you look at. The thing about statistics, if you look at the numbers in America, there's far more firefighters in America than there are in the UK, as you know. An interesting stat that I've seen is, if you look at the stats from up to 2020, it was something like 68% of line of duty deaths were attributed to cancer.
68%?
Yeah.
Wow.
The last graph that come out from that, from the American Firefighters Association, it's now up to 74%. Okay. Now the remaining biggest sector is cardiovascular. So you in your background as BA, CFBT, we know about rhabdomyolysis, yet most of the fire service really don't understand that. We've got repeated low level of exposures to carbon monoxide now being identified as a potential trigger for Alzheimer's and dementia.
When you said that in there, that one, because it didn't make me reflect, we'd spoken about Emily Watkins and Anna Steck's work. I had completely forgotten that one.
Yeah.
And I think that one, I think it's probably far higher than it was reported, because we associate it with getting old. I'm a bit, I can't quite, you just lose. Sometimes I find myself, it's quite pertinent as a podcast when you're searching for a word and you think, Jesus, but even sometimes, if you ask me what I've done this last week, if I don't look at my diary, I'm not trying to pretend, because I sympathise with people that are genuinely diagnosed and struggle with these things, but I think that's really scary. Because those low-level ones, you spoke in there around the effect and the sort of unseen people that this most affects as well. Our fire investigators, our other first responders, our paramedics, our police officers. That bit is really what made me think of the low-level exposure. Because if it's not hot and it's not on fire, we assume the risk is gone.
So an interesting one, and I found this interesting, and I'll send it to you by email later. So Carl is sat in there from AIB, great guy. Did some work with me on Monday up at Duxford, and the AIB have done a lot of work on contaminants, and the only reason that they didn't win this first award was because it's kind of one small unit, but I absolutely applaud what they've done. Anyway,
I've had the AIB on the podcast. Really
fantastic.
Nice. Really support their individuals as well. Sorry, but I know what you're going to say.
So They'd done some body work, and what they'd done, they'd got a light aircraft in from a crash scene, and they'd put it in the hangar, and they've spent money on some really good diagnostic equipment, you know, benzene monitors and particulate monitors. So they put this aircraft in, and I've got the diagrams with the digital readout. 3 days, 72 hours after it was put into the hangar, so not after the incident, it's been transported back to Farnborough from the incident, the level of benzene present was 3 times the ideal H level for benzene.
Wow.
Okay, so we assume that's clean for us, potentially 4 or 5 days after, and we're starting looking at it. Prior to all of this, without those monitors, we wouldn't know. I was speaking to a fire investigator who's got a filtration mask on. Fine, that's good for particulates. And I says to him, I can see you're not protecting your neck. Why do I need to? So, well, this area is the second highest absorption point in the body. It's next to the lymph nodes. You need to be looking at either wearing a particulate blocking hood like firefighters do, or certainly a particulate blocking snood that protects this area underneath your filtered mask. Well, I didn't know any of that. I said, so when you've been in a scene, I said, do you double glove every time? Do you use barrier cream? Do you wipe down, you know, your neck, your nose, blow your nose, wipe this, you know, drink water? Why? I said, because just because the scene's cold doesn't mean to say that, one, the ultrafine particulates that are present, you can't see them. He said, oh, I've seen them in the air. I said, no. I said, they're not the ultrafines. They're particulate matter. They're not the ultrafines. So you need to apply the same principles that a B18 coming outward when you've an FI and you've been in a scene, even if it's cold. And the same with, if you will, FI, fire crews, paramedics. Everybody should be logging their exposures. So just talking to Mick O'Brien there, people say to me, CFBT trainers say, well, we only burn clean pallets. Define a clean pallet for me, because they're tannalized. To be outside, they have to be pressure treated so they don't rot. So they're not clean, are they? Because they've got a chemical treatment to them.
Yeah.
Overseas, one of the fire departments overseas, they now use naturally dried pine pellets. So they're natural wood, and they're just allowed to dry, and that's what they use in their attack units.
Wow.
You know? So the world is changing in terms of the approach to.
I'm not saying stop, do it.
No.
I'm saying think about it.
Think about how you change it.
Yeah.
Now, I'll give you an example. I won't say the service, but one airport, I was doing a gas detection course there a few weeks ago, and they'd been to a local brigade to do a CFBT refresher. So they already have been trained. They're going for a refresher. They said that in the attack unit, when we were in it, they couldn't get off the floor because it was 650 in the unit. And I said, why are they cooking you when you're going for a refresher? Why are you getting anywhere close to that kind of... They literally, even with all the kits on, flashes, everything, they said we couldn't get our heads off the floor of the unit. There's something wrong in that.
As you to say, warm to inform.
Yeah.
You don't need to burn to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We shouldn't need to, should we?
No.
You know. So, and you know, next door with the attack panel that I have, I said to the guys yesterday, that's train without trace. That's the phrase I kind of think with that.
Okay.
You know, with the misty mask, with the attack panel, there's no residues, there's no trace, so we can train anywhere and leave no trace. It isn't replacing burns. And I say to everybody I talk to, I am not advocating we stop burning in training. But what we shouldn't be doing is burning in the frequencies that we have been doing. I know of an airport who was doing CFBT training every 3 months. And I said to them, why are you doing that? You know, just justify that to me, because it's probably 16 years since I did my last refresher in an attack unit. Can I still gas school? Of course I can. No, you don't forget techniques. There's updates to the science sometimes behind it, and it has changed, as you know, it's changed. You know, the pulsing and everything else. You know, direct attack. There's all kinds of changes coming in now. I strive to stay up to date, but we don't need to burn to learn every time. There are it should be blended.
Definitely.
And so the youngsters can learn off the older guys who can give them the tips, the techniques and everything else. So apathy is the biggest one. Apathy being, it's too late for me. That's one form of apathy. Apathy, you know, I have 40 years in this job. I keep myself clean. And, you know, I've had, like I say, people sat there looking at their phone instead of listening to what I'm saying. And I pull them up and I say, excuse me, when you go for a pee later on, will you wash your hands before you have a pee? You haven't been listening to what I've said, have you? You know,
that was such an interesting one. It seems it's the difference between obvious and oblivious.
Yeah.
You just go, oh God, I never thought about that.
Well, you think when you were, you know, instructing,
Yeah.
you got your gloves on, your cuticles are dirty, you know, under your nails, your hands, you've washed them, you do that, you can still smell the paraffin and everything else on them. You go for a pee, you're getting hold of something that's thin-skinned with huge blood vessels connected to the bladder, you know, and everything else down that area, you know.
Yeah.
It's no surprise, is it? You know, it really is no surprise.
It's very uncomfortably logical
Yeah.
when you said it, and it just hit me like a train. I was like, oh, wow.
So I've got a news article I can show you from Brazil. That's, you know, it's a BBC website article about the amputations. And I made the mistake of going looking it up. Oh my, honestly, when you see the pictures, you think,
Yeah. Something that's, like you say, behaviourally, very so easy to change.
But I'd not heard of it.
No.
And now I know what things to look for. And the whole point of the foundation, when I get set up, Robbie's due to retire later this year.
He is, yeah.
And from that lived experience, Robbie, I'm hoping, is going to come on board on the Invisible Risk tutor team to take all this background knowledge into a trainer type course. Not for profit. So there will be a cost to it to cover, because people doing this have got hotel fees and
travel around the UK.
But anything that you would class as a profit is ploughed back into training resources. So, for example, the tools,
The mannequins and the tools,
and all that, or testing events. You know, so the Invisible Risk will sponsor a prostate cancer screening day or a breast screening day. Because it's important we have that lived experience. It's important that we understand, you know, I'm making sure on the committee that we have somebody from Women in the Fire Service to represent that. Have we got a voice? Are we being listened to? It's important we're covering everybody, retired members. You know, absolutely, you know, so important. You know, nobody should be forgot. We've had a great career, all of us. I still love the job. I consider myself blessed that 46 years from being a recruit, I'm still working on fire stations every week.
Yeah.
So, you know, I work with some wonderful people, but we have to wake up. The contaminants opened the door to cancer. It then opened the door to rhabdomyolysis, heat stress and exposures, and Estek Emily Watkins has done fantastic stuff. Then we get the low-level exposure to CO and this link to Alzheimer's and dementia, ototoxins causing deafness and tinnitus in firefighters through absorption of toxins into the air. That article I only got last week. So massive changes coming out, and a lot of them, it's like, well, how do we just manage that? Simple changes, not break the bank to make it happen. So it's all good, Pete.
John, it's exciting to see it continue. The growth of these events, your own personal event, the awards that are starting this year. It's really exciting, mate. It's an absolute pleasure to always spend time with you.
Good.
I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, Pete. All right. Thanks, Bob.